They found him pacing the Tower of the Hand long after the hour of the bat, candle stubs guttering in a ring around the table as if he had summoned small moons and watched them die one by one. The open book lay before him, the pages marked in several places with ribbon and strips torn from an old letter he could not bear to read again. Outside his window the night gathered itself upon the city, and the whisper of the Blackwater drifted in, steady as breath. Eddard Stark rested his hands on the table and closed his eyes, not in prayer but in pure calculation, the human sort where one weighs duty against danger and finds no measures that spare either side. By day, in court and in corridors, men said his northern sense was simple like an axe. They were wrong. Steel seemed plain because it wore its edge naked. The honing had cost knights. He looked at the ink glass, at the stacks of thin sand he would sprinkle to dry his words. He had not been bred to conspiracies and codes, but winter breeds thrift, and the habit of doing much with little. A few letters in the right hands would be a blade of their own. He brushed a hand across the piled papers, feeling the lift of parchment against his fingers, and the ache of his hand from hours of writing. He thought of his father standing in the God's Wood at Winterfell, frost in his beard, telling him once, "Words are wind unless the man stands behind them, but wind, gathered and shaped, moves ships and storms." He wrote again, forcing his tired hand to evenness. He did not accuse, he described. He laid out the matter as he would to a bannerman asked to ride into heavy snow, as he had done all his life. No flourish, no plea. There was the habit of the line, the history of the blood that nodded and ran. The matters Jon Arryn had dug toward, and for which he had died. Eddard explained what he had found, not in the manner of a priest who would tell them what to believe, but as a lord laying down the shape of a road. He gave names, dates, witnesses to hair dark as midnight and eyes like coal, and he set beside those names the golden-headed children that the realm called royal. He made note of the book he had read, because lords believed in books when steel failed them. He copied the passage he had read 3 times and marked with red wax the seals of those whose words had sent men to their graves. He wrote in his own hand the oath he had sworn to Robert Baratheon, and how oath and truth had suddenly fallen into enmity. He did not write of the talk in the God's Wood with the Queen, that he would keep in his mouth, for if his letters were seized it would be one more thing to turn against him. He sealed each letter himself, pressing the dire wolf deep into wax so the mark bit. He addressed them first to the great houses, each by name, to Stannis Baratheon at Dragonstone, rightful heir by law, to Renly Baratheon, Lord of Storm and South, whose vanity might yet be turned toward justice if there was no room for a lie to flourish, to Hoster Tully at Riverrun, father of his wife, to Jon Arryn's widow, no, not to Lysa. She sat on her eyrie of fears, and had already fled the truth once. Not to Lysa, then, to Yohn Royce at the gates of the moon, and to Varys Egan's successor, and to the Lords Declarant if he could name them in the right way. He wrote to Wyman Manderly, fat as plenty and shrewd as a moneylender, because ships and coin mattered, and White Harbor had both. He wrote to Rickard Karstark and Roose Bolton by separate hands, because the closer the letter to Winterfell, the safer it would be to speak plain. He wrote to Mace Tyrell at Highgarden, a peacock who loved the feel of plumes, and to Olenna, the name he did not put on paper. He wrote instead to the Lady of Highgarden, trusting that someone there with sharper eyes would read between his lines. He wrote to Doran Martell at Sunspear, who was a slow river whose depth people forgot until they were already drowning. He wrote to Balon Greyjoy on Pike, though he doubted the wave-bearded lord would be moved by law. He wrote to Paxter Redwine because the Arbor had ships, and to the Citadel at Oldtown, not the Conclave but 1 or 2 maesters with sound reputations, men who might, at the least, note a contradiction and pass it along like a cough. He also wrote a packet to Winterfell addressed to Maester Luwin, with careful instructions in a smaller hand to copy and send these letters along North and River where needed, and another set that he enclosed and sealed, so Luwin would not need to write what had been written. Men might open ravens in King's Landing. The same men would not think to break old Nan's envelope at Winterfell or the one addressed to a sleepy tower on the White Knife. The river would carry words men did not see. Fat Tom brought him the wine he had asked for hours ago. It had long gone flat in the earthen cup. Ned took a swallow all the same, more ceremony than need, and told Tom which men would take which letters. Desmond to the river gate in the morning to find a trustworthy riverman bound for Duskendale. Jax to the fish market where some Stormlander fishermen still kept their boats. Varley to the Street of Sisters to a certain sailor September he had never been in and now must trust. Tomard to the docks to speak to the Myrish captain he liked because the man had once refused a Lannister coin in Ned's hearing. He kept 3 letters in a leather pouch for himself, and another for a boy Yoren kept, a sharp-eyed wisp who watched everything and spoke little. "Milord," Tom said, scratching at his beard, which might have been called red in some regions and brown in others. "They'll watch your door as soon as dawn comes, if not before. The Queen has ears in our bread. There is no bread left we can eat without someone's thumb pressed into it," Ned said. "All the same, the Night's Watch has its own way, and they do not answer to the Queen. Yoren will carry what he must, and Davos Seaworth will carry us. If I can get word to him by other means." "Davos," Tom repeated, confused. It was a low name to hear in the Tower of the Hand, and thus safe. "Go," Ned said. "Wake no one you do not need to. If you are stopped, say you are sent to fetch a physician for me. Say I am ill. It is only a little lie." Tom grinned at that. "We never swore not to lie, just not to run." When the men had gone, Ned sat again and reread the last letter, the one to Stannis. It was least likely to be intercepted. The king's brother kept Dragonstone like an old wound, raw and unvisited. The heat of the table had softened the wax. Ned pressed his seal into it one more time, as if he could stamp certainty into a world built of treachery. He heard the door open without knock and did not turn. Only one man in this city entered his room like that. "The city's winds are clammy tonight," Varys murmured. "Close the door," Ned said. "If you have come to whisper that I do a foolish thing, you've wasted your breath." Varys's silk slippers made no sound as he drifted nearer. "I never call truth foolish, Lord Stark. Only the hour of it." He eyed the letters scattered like flat little bodies. "Ah, you have decided to share your discovery. A pity, from certain points of view." "From yours?" Ned asked. "From the view of those who prefer their schemes quiet as rats behind walls, yes. When sunlight pours in, all the old clever holes are of no use." He smiled, full lips pinched at the corners. "I am not your enemy. You are everyone's enemy and everyone's friend. By turns," Ned said. "That is your way. I have chosen mine. Of course, there are pages in play you have not seen. And yet," Ned said, "the story is the same." Varys shook his head slightly. "You prefer stories where the villain is wholly dark and the hero wholly bright. You were bred among snows that make a man crave clean lines. The South is not like that. Your letters will fly. Some will be read. Some will be burned. Some will be opened and copied and resealed with care, and the man who receives it will have 2 versions and wonder which is true. Some will never arrive. I would urge you to consider." "I have considered. Will you carry one?" Varys blinked. "You honor me. For whom?" "For Dragonstone. The king's brother will heed no messenger in Lannister colors, or in yours, but you have carried less savory burdens. One more letter will not bend your back. You ask me to choose the next king in a sense," Varys said, sounding amused. "Very well. My birds might be persuaded to roost at Dragonstone's rookery tonight. The wind favors the island, and I cannot bear to see men suffer because others lie. Besides," he added, a glint in his eye that might have been mirth or malice, "when I told you in the crypts that Robert would not be the last king to die, I did not think you would try so hard to prove me wrong by swiftly making a better one." "Robert is not yet dead," Ned said. "I did not say he was." Varys inclined his head. "Shall I tell you one more truth, Lord Stark? Some men do not love their children. Some men love them too much. We shall all drown in that, before all is done." "Leave," Ned said. "If you mean to help, carry that letter. If not, leave me to my work." When he was alone again, he laid his hands on the table and breathed, steadying himself, and thought of the way frost crept along a window when the fire burned low, a slow claiming pattern by pattern. He saw a face in frost that was not Robert's nor Cersei's nor even Jaime's. but the face of the boy who had climbed a tower in the north and had fallen, and who might yet rise. He would do what he could while he could still do anything at all. By first light, the last of his men had slipped from the tower. Yoren came to him at dawn as agreed, grumbling, and let a skinny boy with eyes like chips of river stone into the room to stand near the hearth like a stray cat. Ned knelt and tied the leather pouch around the boy's waist himself, tugging it tight. "You are to sleep by day and walk by night," he told the boy. "Do not take the river road if men follow you. The watch has its own ways north." The boy's mouth twitched, either smile or fear. "I'll be dust," he said. "No one sees dust." "Good," Ned said. He stood and looked at Yoren. "Do you trust him?" "I don't trust anyone," Yoren said evenly, and then, after a beat, "But this one's got a head like a hook. He catches things others miss." "Good," Ned said again. "Go." When the door closed, he allowed himself a moment to sit with the quiet. He was cold, and he did not know whether it was from the air or his future. Then he made himself move. There was court to attend, and a king to keep alive if he could, and a city to hold off from the edge of a knife. He walked down the steps like any other morning, nodded to a pair of guards whose names he had made a point of learning, and stepped into the day with the calm of a man who has already done the desperate thing and must now suffer the ordinary. The desperate, like winter, would not be done with him. At Dragonstone, the wind of the narrow sea sang in the stones and made the carved dragons appear to exhale mist. In the rookery, Maester Cresson warmed his old hands over a brazier and looked up when the raven beat its wings against the window like a fist. The bird shook salt spray from its feathers as though it had flown through rain. When he loosened the ribbon from its leg and saw the seal, his hands shook, for he would have known that dire wolf anywhere. He broke the wax carefully, as if he might learn something from the way it cracked, and read. He read twice, and then sat a long time staring at nothing, his mouth moving. Stannis Baratheon came when summoned, his boots hard on stone, his mouth as thin as ever. He had a candle stub in one fist as if it were a weapon. Davos Seaworth stood behind him like a shadow, hat in hand. The hall smelled of old smoke and sea salt and, faintly, okayed onions. The dawn had not fully taken hold. Cresson held out the letter wordless. Stannis took it, read, and read again, each time slower. His jaw worked, his knuckles whitened and then let go. "Gods have mercy," Davos said softly, when Stannis passed him the paper, his voice in the room like something that had slipped in with the sea breeze. "If Lord Eddard sends this, he's set his face fully." "He should have done so long before," Stannis said. "He should never have. It's done now. I knew it. I am not surprised. I am not surprised." And yet he sounded, Davos thought, like a man who had been stabbed in the scar of a wound he had forgotten to guard. "It is the truth," Stannis added, with the same bleak certainty he brought to everything else. "Truth is heavy. The realm will not want to carry it." "The realm is a horse," Davos said, surprising himself. "The rider chooses the burden." "Begging pardon, milord." Stannis's eyes flicked to him, not unkind for once, or at least not unthinking. "Do not beg pardon for speaking sense, Davos. Lord Stark says he is sending proof to each lord. That is wise. The Lannisters will say he lies for his own gain, but he has always been dull with his own honor. You cannot forge that kind of reputation quickly." He put the paper on the table, smoothed it once, then took it up again. "I had hoped he would write to me alone, but better this. Alone I am only Stannis. With others, I am law." "We will need ships," Cresson said quietly, "and men, and the Stormlands, if they will answer." "They will answer," Stannis said. "They did not answer when I asked in peace, but they will answer to law. And if not to law, then to fear. I will not move like Renly laughs in tourney grounds. I will move as a sword moves. Davos, write to Laurent Grandison at Storm's End. Write to Selmy at Kingsguard, to whatever man among them has any honor left." He paused. "No. Ser Barristan is not a man to be written to by me. He is proud and will choose as he chooses. Write instead to Courtenay Penrose." He may still hold there if Renly has not already stuffed the place full of singers. Davos hired a boy to carry his letters down the cliff to where small boats bobbed in a sheltered slip. Cresson sent his ravens on their way, cursing softly at one that bit him and then forgiving it aloud, as if the gods would mark kindness to birds against whatever he had failed to do with men. Stannis walked the battlements and watched the morning come, the sky over the gullet a thin smear of light. He had been waiting for this moment since he had first suspected his brother's boys were no Baratheons. He had been patient, and patience had always tasted like ashes. Now the fire touched powder. "Send word to Salladhor Saan," he said at last to Davos, not quite looking at him, which Davos recognized as Stannis's way of granting unfamiliar mercy. "Tell him there's gold in King's Landing and a better purpose than gold besides." "He likes gold better than any purpose," Davos said. Stannis's mouth twitched. "He likes whatever he can count. He will count me soon enough if I win. And if I lose, he will count his coin and call me a fool." "Me lord," Davos said carefully. "One man's word will not sway every lord, but Lord Stark is not only one man. He's the North. If he says it, men will believe it because he would not say it if it were not true." Stannis lifted the letter again, and this time he held it against the wind. "I will write to the Lords Paramount, all of them. I will ask them to uphold law. Then I will go and make them do it. At Highgarden, a place that could make a drunk desire sobriety for fear of missing any scent." Lady Olenna Tyrell turned the pot of seeds on its side and frowned at the twist of roots she had coaxed out of a hard, dry clod. She made a sound in her throat that had cut foolishness short in 3 generations of lords. "Well, well," she said when the letter was brought to her. "The North's ice finally thaws to a flood." Mace Tyrell, belly outthrust like a cuirass, blinked at the paper and then at his mother, and then at the paper again, as if words might grow different upon second gaze. His mouth made a small O. Beside him, his daughter Marjorie watched with bright, unblinking eyes and folded her hands so perfectly that her grandmother wanted to shake her just to see if she could spoil something so precise. "Is this true?" Mace said at last, and sounded both shocked and pleased, as if truth were a pastry that had puffed unexpectedly in his oven. "Truth is less interesting to us than the fact that the hand believes it and sends it to everyone," Olenna said, plucking at the letter as lightly as she would a harp string. "If he has sent this to the Redwyne, he has sent it to Dorne and to the Vale and to the Westerlands too. Thank the gods for the hand's slow-boiling sense. He has done abruptness becomes him. Stannis will claim the throne," Marjorie murmured, not looking at her grandmother but at the letters themselves, the careful hand, the blunt words. "He will come with law in one hand and swords in the other. And Renly? Renly will want to play at crowns, as any handsome young man might when the glass shows him the sun," Olenna said. "He is charming, but charm rarely survives contact with duty. It is crushed between the two like a lark in a fist." She smiled thinly. "We have been sending songs and sweetmeats to Storm's End for years. We can send a girl. Or we can send something else." Mace drew himself up. "The reach is strong. If the king is false, we must support what is right. We are gardeners. Gardeners prune." "Yes," Olenna said. "We prune when the plant is ours. This plant is not ours." She tapped the letter. "This is a northern frost. It will kill blossoms that were never ours to keep." Marjorie said, "And the queen? Will she let the frost touch her?" "The queen will deny, of course. She will deny with all the power of her father and her wiles. She why?" LL spit at the sky. "But birds do not dislike the truth or prefer the lie. They fly where they are sent." She sighed. "We must watch, and we must prepare to embrace whatever seems least likely to spill our blood all over our good soil. If Stannis comes with a sword of law, we will not stand in front of him. We will stand beside him, and hand him a cup when he is thirsty, and whisper that his daughter is very sweet. If Renly plays at being king, we will applaud, and then take the stage away." Mace flushed and blustered and called for Randall Tarly, and for Paxter Redwyne, and for a dozen others whose voices made tables groan under the weight of their opinions. Olenna sat back in her chair and let them clamor, her eyes half closed to hide her calculation. Her granddaughter's hand lay on the table, slender and still. Olenna reached out and patted it as if comforting a small bird, and when Marjorie's eyes met hers, both pairs were bright and terribly calm. The letter to Sunspear traveled with a caravan of traders. The maester at Gaston Grey wrote a careful copy, and the captain of the guards there sent a message ahead. Ariohoda brought the news through the dry heat in slow steps that did not quite disturb the sand. Prince Doran sat in the shade looking at his son through the window of water and light that turned the water gardens into a room that never ended. He looked at the letter as if it were a snake coiled under a mat. "It matches what we suspected," he said at last, voice soft enough that even the nearest page nearly missed it entirely. "It matches more than what we suspected. Corroborates." Ario said nothing. He had learned long ago that silence was the weapon his prince liked best. "Stannis will make the law a whip," Doran went on. "Cersei will hide behind her father, and the father will do what he always does. Break things until a new order arises that looks suspiciously like the old order except with more gold in his vaults and less opposition in the field." He put the letter down and steepled his fingers. "There will be a war. Our impulse is to wait. We are patient. We hold grudges like the desert holds heat. But we cannot wait forever. The lion will gnaw his tail clean off if we let him." "The sons of Elia," Ario said. "Always," Doran said. The word was like salt in many things and in all of their food. When the lion is forced to look at law instead of strength, he shows his throat. But we do not wish to be the hand that cuts there. Not at first. We will let the storm break upon the city and the river crash against the west, and then we will decide where our spears find their true mark. Not for justice alone, for what comes after." He lifted his hand, and the heat made it slow. "Send quiet messages to the east. We will want to know what we do not yet know." He smiled a slow, inward smile. "The North's wolves have howled, at last. We will hear what else that stirs." In White Harbor, Wyman Manderly read the letter aloud twice, though his maester could have done it as well. He fingered the edge of the parchment as if it were a pie he was not sure he should cut. Around him sat his son Wylus and the other judges of his merman's court. Fish sizzled on the hearth and turned the air into a greasy smell that made him sweat. He wiped at his face with a cloth already damp. "The hand speaks plain," Wylus said when at last the reading was done. "He does not beg. He does not paint. He lays boards. Men will walk on boards." Wyman grunted. His small, clever eyes sparkled above his vast cheeks. "Men prefer to strut upon stone, but they will walk upon boards if they must. The North will rise if Lord Stark bids it. I have ships. The West has ships too, and they will have more if the red wine listens to his belly and his pride rather than his head." He pinched his lower lip in thought. "Send a fast galley to the narrow sea. Tell the merchants there that any ship bearing Lannister colors will not be welcome in my harbor. Whisper it in their cups. And send salted beef and hard bread and onions to Eastwatch. Winter is a long mouth, even when it is the city biting." He sent a man to the docks to look for a Myrish captain who had once delivered a girl to White Harbor and asked nothing for her because she had been only a girl and had looked hungry. Wyman trusted men who could be kind when it cost them coin. He thought of the letter, of its careful hand, and he thought, Eddard Stark would not do this if he had a softer road to take. The realm had chosen rock. They would climb or they would break. In the Westerlands, at a camp stamped hard into the earth like a mark of ownership, Tywin Lannister broke the seal of the letter with a fingernail and read it standing, handed it to Kevan without a word, and waited while his brother's mouth tightened. The tent smelled of leather and canvas and the clean oil of well-kept armor. Outside, men shouted and laughed and gambled with knucklebones. Somewhere, a smith hammered rhythm into steel. "So," Tywin said at last, when Kevan looked up. "It was only a matter of time," Kevan said carefully. "It was," Tywin agreed. "I gave them time to forget. They did not forget." He took the letter back and rolled it in his hand, like a man testing the weight of a hilt. "Stannis will use this. He has waited for a tool that suits his nature. He will write to every lord and ask them to honor the law they like to drag behind them like an heirloom. They will preen, and then they will remember to be afraid. Afraid of Stannis? Kevin asked. Afraid of being seen to spit in the face of law, Tywin said flatly. Even those who will spit anyway prefer to do it in private and call it something else in public. He set the letter down. We will deny, of course. We will call Stark a traitor. Littlefinger will supply a pretty phrase or two for the witnesses to repeat. We will produce a maester with a book of our own. It will not matter, not to those who have already chosen. A side in their hearts. And what of fathers? What of your grandchildren? Kevin asked. He was not a man given to sentiment, but he was a good father, and sometimes that leaked into his voice when he did not intend it. They are assets, Tywin said, like gold, like swords. We do not speak of gold as my daughter, or swords as my beloved. His eyes were not unkind, but they were empty of nearly everything else. We will keep our terrified little king upon his narrow seat. We will make the city watch ours again and tie the tongues of any who would report otherwise. We will call the hand's letters false. We will call for his head if he speaks again. Kevin said nothing. Send word to Jaime, Tywin said. Tell him the Riverlands must burn faster. If the Tully will not give us the Wolf's wife, he will at least give us smoke. Men respect smoke. They tell themselves it is the smell of someone else's problem. And Tyrion? Kevin asked cautiously, for even the name might be sand under a great wheel. Tywin poured wine and drank and did not offer any. Tyrion will be useful for once, he said. He enjoys games of tongues and tricks. He may do so where that is needed. Send him to the city. If he dies there, he will die doing something I can approve of. Kevin inclined his head. He loved his brother in the odd way men love a mountain, as something that shapes the weather whether or not it cares. At Winterfell, the ravens came one after the other as if they had chased one another all the way from the south and were glad to roost anywhere. Maester Luwin's fingers shook when he unwrapped the parchment. He smoothed it carefully and read. He sat very still a long time after, while Bran asked him questions about a story Hodder had been telling, and Rickon crawled under the table to pull at the leg hairs of an unsuspecting guard. Robb came at once when called. He took the letter, read it, and went paler by a shade that a southern eye might not catch. He set his jaw. Father has done this, he said. He has, Luwin said. He glanced at Bran and Rickon. Take them to the yard, he told the guard softly. Have them watch the archers. When the boys were gone, Luwin leaned his elbows on the table and fixed Robb with that mild, near-hopeless look that maesters acquire the way hedgehogs acquire prickles. You will be called now, he said. Men will ride to your gates and ask what you will do, not because they cannot act without you but because they will not. That is a heavy thing to carry so young. Robb swallowed and nodded. We will call the banners, he said. We must. The Riverlands are already aflame. Our people look to us. If Father has sent this to all lords, he has put a brand in all of them. They will expect us to hold it steady. We will write to your grandfather and to your mother, Luwin said, and to the Reeds, and to the Umbers and the Glovers. And we will grain our granaries and sharpen our plows. Our plows? Robb asked, startled and briefly too young. War eats, Luwin said, and the North feeds itself or starves. Steel without bread is a short tale. Robb laughed then, a small, dry sound that had no mirth in it but a little frantic energy. You sound like my mother, he said. She'll have more to say, I imagine. We will hear soon enough, Luwin said. He placed a hand on the boy's forearm, not as a maester but as a man who had watched a child become a lord across the span of 2 winters and 3 harvests. Your father did this because it was the honorable thing to do, but it may also be the clever thing. There is a bottom to every well. The queen cannot cut every raven's throat. Robb nodded. If she has a blade near mine, she may try. Later, in the Godswood, Robb knelt where his father had knelt and whispered whatever prayers came into a mind full of iron and fear. The face carved in the weirwood looked down at him as it had looked down at the ones before, not caring, very likely, but willing to listen all the same. Caitlyn's hands shook when she touched the paper. She was at the Eyrie still, and the mountain air had made her hands dry and cracked as old leather. It made tears evaporate quickly. She read, and the words wrapped her in a grim calm she had often felt before in battle tents when the shouting died and the killing had to be done now or not at all. "Of course," she said, aloud to no one, except to the memory of her father's voice, which always seemed to say "of course" in the same mild way, whether one had done a good thing or a foolish one. "Of course you would do this, Ned." Lisa's breath rustled against the frame of the door. "He puts our son in danger," she hissed. "Do you see nothing? You are blind with the North, Cat. You always were." "Our son," Caitlyn said, very patiently because she would not have this conversation and yet must, "is safer for truth than for lies. Your husband died for truth. Do you prefer to make the same death worthless by refusing to touch it?" She did not look up. "I prefer enemies who are brave enough to tell me what they are doing." Lisa's mouth tightened. "You bring your husband's war to my doorstep. I will not open my gates to it." Caitlyn folded the letter and slid it into her sleeve as if she were hiding a small, cold blade. "No. You will close your gates to your own shame. I am leaving for Riverrun. The river burns. A Tully does not sit her backside in comfort while fish roast." "Then fall," Lisa said, nearly shrieking. "Fall with the rest. I will keep my son safe." Caitlyn walked past her sister and did not reach out an arm. In that moment, she felt old and odd and more alone than she had ever been. She thought of the boy on the mountain throne, sucking at fear as if it were a sweet. She thought of her own children. One letter could split a realm. Another could stitch it. She would stitch where she could with whatever thread she had. In King's Landing the wind shifted. The stink of the street of flour drifted differently. The swallows turned on their wing as if remembering an older pattern. Cersei Lannister stood on her balcony and watched the blue of the Blackwater flatten and then ripple back, as if a dragon had breathed just below. She did not yet know about every letter, but she had heard of some. Varys had told her in his way, by telling her nothing and making sure she heard it. A rumor that moved evenly in a city meant a hand shaking it like a sieve. She called for Pycelle and for Littlefinger, and she poured wine for them and smiled with all the practiced sweetness that had made men forget her father's stone jaw. Pycelle gulped and wheezed and called for young assistants to fetch this and that. Peter Baelish took his cup, set it down, and made a joke about wines from the arbor that urged men to confess their wives' sins. He let his mouth form a little smirk that had charmed more coins out of more purses than any whore in King's Landing. "Lord Stark sends lies," Cersei said, and made the word lies hard as a thrown gem. "He puts them on raven wings as if feathers could make filth fly higher." Pycelle bobbed and called it monstrous. Littlefinger smiled very slightly and said nothing until she looked at him, and even then, he let silence hang a heartbeat too long. "I have not seen the letter myself," he said, "but one hears Lord Stark's hand is very plain. Men trust plainness. It looks like truth." "Make it look like treason," Cersei said softly. "I do not care how you do it." "There are many ways," Littlefinger said cheerfully. "Some involve blood, some do not. You have always had a taste for bold colors, my queen." He tilted his head. "If I may suggest, sometimes bold strokes make a painter look like a child pushing his fingers into a bowl of red. Sometimes one must shade instead. Stannis will write letters of his own," Pycelle wheezed, mopping his forehead. "We must call him what he is." "What is he?" Cersei snapped. She had always disliked the old man's voice, the way it turned any strong word into a pudding. A man who craves what is not his," Pycelle said after a struggle. "So are you," she said, too sweetly. When he paled, she laughed and patted his hand hard enough to make him flinch. "Fetch me the captain of the city watch, and send for Janos Slynt, and tell my sweet son the king that his mother wishes to speak to him." Later, when the boy came, all stiff with new clothing and smelling faintly of horse and cedar, she kissed his hair and thought, not for the first time, and not for the last, "He is my work. She had not made him with love the way some women brag about, but out of stubbornness, and that is a kind of love too, the sort that survives knives. "Men will say things about you," she told him, and brushed a lock of hair from his brow as if his head were a chalice and she wanted to see the gold underneath. "They will tell you not to listen, but sometimes you must. It is a king's task to know which lies to ignore and which lies to use." "I will cut out their tongues," Joffrey said, beaming, as if he were offering her something clever. "Do not spend all your anger at once," Cersei said. "Save some. Winter is long." When the king returned from his boar hunt, he returned with death stumbling beside him like a too merry companion. Eddard stood at the end of the bed and listened to the dying man rave about wine and women and about how men had become soft in his city. There was a smell like old apples left in a barrel too long. Varys stood to one side, fluttering. Cersei knelt, and the candle cast her face in oranges and reds, as if she were lit by some other fire. Ned wrote the words Robert rasped, and when the word that would have made everything simple stuck in the king's throat because it had never belonged to him, he wrote what was spoken and kept his pen steady. He watched the boy they called Prince, and the girl with her southern grace and her mouth set in fear. Sansa kept her hands folded just so and tried not to shake. Arya had eyes like a hawk watching a snake twist in sand. When Robert died, he died as men do who have been loved too much for their meat and too little for their mind. Loudly, stupidly, with both hands reaching backward for a time that had never existed. The city sank into the quiet of something terrible, pretending it is ordinary. Ned took his paper and his honor and walked toward the throne room with Renly's clattering words still in his ears. The younger Baratheon had urged speed, had urged steel, had spoken of seizing children. Ned had refused. He could not yield that much of himself to win. Perhaps he could have and remained who he was. He did not believe so. So he walked into the dragon's mouth wearing a simple man's dignity and a 40-year weight of trust in law. Littlefinger was there. Janos Slynt was there, with more men than he should have had. And their eyes had a look that told Ned the coin had already been counted. The paper in his hand might as well have been a ribbon to tie around his wrists. The coup unfolded like a trick seen from too far away. One saw hands move, but not which had the coin. Men died in the seconds it took to realize where the blade was. Fat Tom fell with his mouth open. Desmond shouted something that might have been a northern curse or a prayer. Swords slid. The sound filled the air like beetles. Cersei smiled and tore the paper with emotion too smooth to be anger. It was practiced contempt. "Treason," she said lightly. Varys disappeared as water sometimes vanishes in sand. Littlefinger put a cool hand on Ned's shoulder and whispered that he had warned him about trusting him, which was perhaps the most honest moment Peter Baelish had ever offered anyone. Ned was taken to the Black Cells. Even there, even while the city roared above and his daughters trembled and men measured their masks of loyalty, his letters flew. Tyrion Lannister received the letter at an inn with a tumbledown roof on the high road and laughed aloud, because there was nothing else to do with a truth that had arrived late and dressed like a debt collector. He read it again, and his laughter slowed into something more like breath. "Your father will be as pleased as a bear in summer," Bronn drawled from the hearth, where he had his boot off and was picking something unpleasant from it with the point of a dagger. "My father is never pleased," Tyrion said. "He experiences degrees of irritation." "You take that after him, then," Bronn said. Tyrion folded the note and tucked it away. "There is going to be a great deal of shouting," he said. "And killing." "Good," Bronn said. "It means wages." "You are a poet," Tyrion told him. "A poet of coin." He considered the words he had read and the men behind them and thought of Joff's sharp little teeth. He thought of his sister's eyes when she saw something she wanted and could not have. He thought of the city. He thought of wildfire. He was always thinking of fire. "Change of plans," he murmured, and the next morning, he changed horses and rode harder. Sansa wrote a letter with hands that tried to be steady and failed. Cersei sat beside her and smiled and told her everything would be well if only everything would be done the way she liked it. Sansa thought of the games she had played as a child, and of songs, and of her father's gaze as he watched her tilt at straw knights with a wooden sword she held as if it were a fan. She wrote words she would come to hate. She thought that the ink was very black. Arya did not write. Arya found Yoren in a corridor where shadows pooled and smelled like wet wool, and she listened when he told her not to be a little fool, and she tucked her hair under a cap and kept her eyes down and let herself become dust. She kept her sword close. Men stepped on dust and did not feel it. She would like that. She would like them to feel it and cough. But for now, she was dust. In a cell below stone, Eddard Stark looked at a spider and felt its small steps along the wall like a ticking clock. Time, he thought. It never goes to sleep even when we do. Varys came and went in robes that whispered like guilty thoughts. He brought news and half-comforts, and he took away hope and then brought it back to see what it would do. Ned learned something about hoping in darkness. It shrinks to fit the space, small and patient, like a coal in an old fire. "Your letters," Varys said once, his head close to the bars. "So many birds have flown. The eaves of the realm are full of them. Men call it treason to speak the truth, but they do not call it treason to hear it. Quite an oversight. If there is a God," Ned said, "he is a patient farmer. He waits for men to reap what they sow." Varys smiled, and even his smile was tired. "In this city we grow different crops." When Stannis' letters followed Ned's, the realm that had been pretending to ignore wind began to admit it felt a draft. Dragonstone sent ravens to Storm's End and to the Tarths, to the Conningtons who bogged in their own grief, to Lord Grandison and to lesser lords who had once shared bread with Stannis and who owed him debts they might prefer to forget. Stannis also sent ships. He sent Salador Saan with a promise tied to his mast and Davos with a promise tied to his heart. He sent his own daughter's embroidery to be displayed in the hall at Storm's End, because those who looked at Shireen's careful stitches might remember he was more than a grim mouth and a set of rules. When he stood in the great hall of Storm's End, the place his brother had given him as one might give a man a bone to gnaw, the walls seemed to lean closer. He did not sit in the Lord's seat, he stood. Men remembered that. Men remember odd things, and in the remembering they choose. Renly was not there. Renly had ridden for Highgarden with speed that would have been admirable if it had been for anything worthy. He had men at his back, many of them pulled by the promise of a girl who looked like summer and a war that looked like a dance. Tyrell banners snapped in the air behind him. Renly smiled and waved and tossed bread to children who ran alongside as if he were a knight in a ballad. He charmed because he could, because it cost him nothing then. Stannis was different. He had no charm to spend. He had iron to crack and grind. He called his bannermen and spoke short words. "The law is not mine to bend," he told them. "It is ours to follow." Some bent to that. Some did not. Most were men who preferred to tie their swords to the belt of a man who would be generous afterward. They looked at Stannis and saw a man who would be fair. They wanted more than fair. Fair feels like hunger when you have tasted glut. But one by one, for pride or fear or a stubborn love of order, enough Stormlords turned. It was not love, but it had the virtue of lasting longer than love in bad weather. The siege of King's Landing did not begin as a siege. It began as a rumor that the harbor was full of ships that would not sail away when the tide turned. It began as a certainty that the chain that did not yet exist in this reality would not save them, because no dwarf had yet dragged it through secret forges or bribed a master to pour steel at midnight. It began as a city that thought itself immortal, realizing it had only a human throat. Davos was the first of Stannis' captains to ease into the Blackwater with a night tide. He handled his ship like a man whispering apologies to a woman he had wronged. Careful, tender, certain. He slipped past the watchfires because the watchfires were dull and the watchmen were hungry, and men in that state see less. He counted the keys and he counted the shadows and he watched the mouths of alleys and he smelled the stink. And he thought, this city is full of men who think themselves clever. Clever men do not know what to do with a fleet. When the dawn came, the harbor was full of sigh. Alas, that had not been there before. In the city, the bells were slow to move. When they did, it was like waking a drunk. Men stumbled and shouted and pulled on belts. In the Red Keep, Cersei smiled and told her son that the men on the water were fools in tin cans. Tyrion arrived that day with dust in his teeth and a grin he could only call defiance if he were drunk. He was not drunk. He walked into the Red Keep and kissed his sister on the cheek and listened while she called him names she never, ever would say before their father. He listened, and then he asked to see the armorer who had once shown him a candle that burned green. The armorer had been killed in a tavern brawl 2 years before. When Tyrion walked into the Great Hall and saw Janos Slynt sitting higher than he should, he smiled because here was a man whose height could be cut. "You're late," Cersei hissed to him after court. "Late is better than dead," Tyrion said. "Most things are." That afternoon he walked the walls and spoke to the men there and remembered all the numbers he had ever been taught and some he had not. He watched the ships and the sailors and he saw something that even Stannis had not yet seen. Hunger. The city would starve sooner than its pride would. He would have to decide what to do with that. Stannis's fleet did not rush the walls. Settled. It settled like a grinding stone set on a wet, steady and patient. Salladhor Saan set up his own little commerce under the black and gold like a man who could not help being himself. He sold trinkets to men who would soon not eat. He sold news to men who would soon die. Davos went ashore at night and spoke to men in taverns and to women who carried buckets and to boys with rats in their hands. He told them what the law would bring, and he listened when they told him what hunger would take. He sent back to Stannis lists of needs and supplies and complaints, and he did not get a reply that answered anything except with a new set of orders, which suited him. Stannis was not a man for letters sent to soften hearts. He was a man for letters that instructed ships where to stand. In the city, Cersei took food from one street to feed another and made certain the city watch got its portion first. Men with billy clubs do not carry them well on empty stomachs. Tyrion argued with her and called for bread to be made on every spare hearth, and suggested that if they would not have grain, they should at least have barley beer. "I am not serving beer to beggars while I sit on a throne," Cersei spat. "You serve worse things every day to men who call it sweet," Tyrion said. He made a grimace. "The city will eat the rats first, then the cats, then the dogs, then each other unless we break the siege." "How?" she demanded. He smiled, a tight, ugly thing. "With ink and with smoke," he said. "And with whispering men who will go tell Stannis that his friends are not what he thinks they are. And with bribes. Gold tastes as good as bread to some." "Ink will not stop ships," Cersei snapped. "No," Tyrion said mildly. "Fire does, though." "There's no wildfire," she said. "It was." "Do not tell me there is no wildfire," Tyrion said, and for once his voice filled the room. "There is always wildfire. It is a city like a midden. The strange and the dangerous sink here and wait to be found." He set about finding it. He found a little, not enough to turn a bay into a furnace, not enough to write a saga about. Enough, perhaps, to make a night brighter. Meanwhile, he replaced Janos Slynt with a man whose first loyalty was to a bribe he had invented himself. It was better to have a thief you owned than a lord who owed someone else. He sent letters with gold to men in the camps outside, who might yet prefer coin to order. He told himself he was not a good man, but there might be a way to be useful anyway. Sansa, in the Red Keep more prisoner than guest, prayed with the queen and then washed her hands until the skin turned red. She learned the names of the cooks and discovered which of them sometimes slipped spoiled meat into a stew and which hid scraps for thin-faced boys and girls outside the back gate. She told Sandor Clegane that she thought he was not as cruel as men said, and he laughed and told her she should get better lies. Arya watched men train in the yard and copied their moves in the night between rushes and stones and splinters. She listened to the hound's voice through walls and believed he hated everyone well enough to be honest when others lied. She did not tell him so. Varys came and went, the salt of sea air somehow always clinging to him even when he was weeks from water. He carried pieces from one board to another and never let anyone see the board he loved best. When he came to Ned's cell, he told him that his letters had reached places letters rarely reached. Kitchens, stableyards, soldiers' tents. "Do not despise the common ear," he said. "It is the last to deafen and the last to turn on you." "What do the great ears do?" Ned asked. They shut at night, Varys said, or open to whispers. Robb Stark left Winterfell with the banners good and red in air, and with a weight on his shoulders like a man walking with a friend upon them. He left Bran to learn to listen to ravens. He left Rickon to learn not to run at every shadow. He left old men to counsel children and children to hold a place for men. He rode with gray wind and the smell of home in his hair, which is to say he rode with loss already in him. He crossed Moat Cailin with a war that had only been half made. The marshes watched him with indifferent eyes. He rode south and the air changed from thin to thick, from air to water. The riverlands welcomed him with scorched fields and burned barns and faces that had learned to say thank you, when what they meant was why did you take so long? The news of Ned's letters had preceded him. Men who had once wondered whether they would have the courage to ride if I invited now wondered whether they had the courage to stay in their beds. They came. Some came for the old vows they had sworn to Winterfell. Some came because they were afraid of being left alone between the lion and the wolf. Some came because war promises a kind of rearranging that gives ambitious men a way to climb. Robb took them all. He learned quickly the first lesson of command. You do not order men by choosing the reasons they bring you. You only choose what to do with the men once they have arrived. He did not style himself king in the north. There was no time, and he had a father in a cell whose beating heart made such a style seem an insult. But he discovered that men called him king anyway, under their breath, to test the word upon their tongues, to see if it fit. He did not forbid it. He did not encourage it. He rode. At the Twins, Walder Frey sniffed his letter and called it fish in summertime. Robb smiled and told him he had brought more important meat. He offered promises and a marriage and a crown of patience, and Walder set his long, old tongue to the taste of all three. Robb watched the old man watch him and thought, here is a man who will never forgive himself for being small, and so will never forgive me for being young. He crossed the bridge anyway because he had to, because sometimes all the roads lead over one man's back. At Riverrun, Hoster Tully took his daughter's hands and called for his eldest child, because his eldest child had always been the river between the banks that held their family together. Catelyn arrived 2 days later, exhausted but unbroken, and told Robb a dozen things he needed to hear in the time it takes to drink a cup of watered wine. He listened. She told him he could win battles and still lose war, and that every decision began as a story you tell yourself about what kind of man you are. He nodded and then did what he had to do. He fought against Tywin's West where the West always seeks to fight. In open ground where speed counts and coin speaks, he found himself outmaneuvered and then learned to be patient. He slipped past an army that should have pinned him like a knife in a table and took the Kingslayer in a trap so elegant it looked simple. He learned that men love a pretty victory. He learned that the city doesn't care about pretty, only about news. He wrote a letter that rode with a man who would never have been allowed into a royal hall and addressed it to a cell deep in rock and iron. Varys made sure it reached the man who needed to read it. Father, it said without the word father, I have the lion caged. The city starves. Stannis stands at your gates. Your letters have made a wind. I will be that wind if I must. Hold. He set the seal of Tully and Stark side by side. Inside the red keep the night the gates opened. It did not feel like treachery at first. It felt like relief. Like air moving at last in a room left shut too long. Davos had walked with a man who had once been a gold cloak and was now just a man with a wife whose hands had gone too thin and a little girl who coughed. He had placed a purse heavier than gold in the man's palm. He had said nothing about law. He had said only that men die when gates do not open in time. The man had nodded and cried and muttered that he would be hanged. Davos had told him what every smuggler knows. The difference between a gallows and a bed is the right night. At midnight, under a sky that had finally remembered it had stars, the man took his key and turned it and the gate creaked. And in that creak was the noise of things breaking and the noise of things being made, sometimes the same sound. Stannis's men came like water. The gold cloaks who stood there looked at one another, and remembered the last time they had been told to turn their cloaks. They remembered the boy on the throne with his sharp smile. They remembered that men prefer to live. Tyrion smelled the city changing before his mind caught up. The air shifted like a gambler turning a card. He ran. he shouted. He sent men to close a gate that had been opened somewhere else. He lit what little wildfire he had in braziers that were too small and could only startle, not scar. Circe gathered the ladies and the children and took them to Maegor's holdfast and had wine served. And she had one cup set aside and no one touched it, and they all knew what it was. Sansa sang for them and no one laughed. Arya slipped out and then back in again, and no one saw because no one looked at dust. Stannis did not enter like a hero. He entered like a man fulfilling a duty. He sent men to the granaries first, to guard them. He sent men to the septs, to keep them from being burned by fools who would call it purging. He sent men to the gates to hold what they had taken. Then he rode to the Red Keep with a banner that was not his brother's stag but himself. A burning heart upon a field of night. The heart was for a god some were learning, and some feared. The night was for the city. The Red Keep did not fall at once. Lannister men know how to hold a wall, but the city around them had already slipped away. The watch was split. The commoners had decided they preferred bread to loyalty. The gates could be opened one by one. It would take hours, perhaps days, with much blood, and he had brought enough men to do it. Stannis was willing to fill the time with blood of his own, but he was more willing to fill it with others if need be. He sent for Davos. He sent for the Hound. Sandor Clegane came because he was curious. He looked at Stannis and saw a man whose face was made of scar without a blade ever touching it. He heard the voice that asked him a question and thought, "This is not like the others. This one would cut my throat and not pretend to regret it." Stannis asked him whether he held with the Lion or with the law. Sandor said he held with staying alive. Stannis nodded as if that were a worthy creed. "Then you will stop men from lighting fires and killing women," he said, "and you will show me where they hide their wine." Sandor nodded. He showed him the wine. He stopped some fires. He did not choose to stop others because he did not see them in time, and because part of him was tired of saving fools from themselves. He found Sansa in a corridor and told her you cannot trust a storm to remember you exist. She smiled at him because her face had learned that reflex. He swore softly and told her where to hide. By dawn, the Red Keep's outer walls were Stannis's, and any man who had ever counted himself Lannister property had red eyes and a mouth to match. Cersei did not go quietly. She stood in the throne room with her son beside her and called Stannis a usurper. She called the law a chain around dull men's necks and snapped that she preferred a lion's jaw. Stannis listened with the patience of a tide. Tyrion stood at her shadow and thought of a dozen decent lines he could deliver and found none that would not spill blood uselessly. "Joffrey Baratheon," Stannis said at last, talking to the boy, "you are no rightful king. You will stand down." Joffrey spat. He reached for his sword. He looked around for men and found fewer than he had thought, because while his mother had planned to hold the city with fear, fear had opened the gates for him as well and let his enemies in. He looked at the Hound and saw, perhaps for the first time in his life, not a man who would die for him but a man who would not. He screamed something obscene. Cersei seized his arm. Sandor took one step back. It was enough. Stannis did not raise his hand. He did not need to. Davos's men moved, quick as any river's hunger, and Joffrey found himself without a sword and then on his knees, and then a hand was in his hair, not unkind, holding him while he panted. Cersei surged toward them and found a dozen pikes in her way. She fell back and her face became a thing. A cry went up in the hall, ragged and ugly and full of a relief that often looks like cruelty. "Do not cheer," Stannis said. "There is no joy in the fall of an order badly made." His voice traveled across stone like the first word a baby makes that is not a cry. "Take the boy to a cell. Feed him. No one is to touch him without my leave." Cersei turned and looked at Tyrion then, eyes wild and very present. He shrugged and lifted his hands to show how empty they were. Sometimes an empty hand is a kindness. Sometimes it is a betrayal. She would decide which later. Now, she hissed and swept out like a torch that had chosen to be wind instead. Stannis watched her go and felt nothing beyond a small sort of justice, narrow as a blade. In the black cells, Ned Stark heard a sound like a city when a stone has been pulled from a wall and felt the air on his face change, though no door opened. He put his hand out and felt the roughness of the wall and thought, impossibly, of birch bark. He laughed once, softly. When Varys came, he came with dust in his hair. The city, Varys said, had a gate. It was the sort of remark Varys liked. True and meaningless until someone unlocked the rest of its sense. Who holds it? Ned asked. Stannis, Varys said. For now. Then I will see my daughters before I die, Ned said. It was not a question. You may do more than that, Varys said. You may live. He went away. The next voice Ned heard was not smooth as silk. It was jagged as a saw. It came with a key that scraped at iron. It came with a guard whose eyes were red as if he had wept for hours and then decided to fight instead. Lord Stark, Davos Seaworth said, and smiled like a man offering an honest trade. I don't know if you remember me. I'm the hand that brought onions to a castle. I've another small thing for you. He opened the cell and light came in.
Ned squinted.
He had not seen much light, and like all northerners, he had forgotten how to keep himself from giving thanks to a thing that could not hear him. I have daughters, he said. We have both, Davos said simply. And there's bread. Ned came into a corridor that smelled like spilled fear and old stone and new possibility. He walked in a world that had not been offered to him the day before. A man could be forgiven for thinking that men do not change the world. The world is large and men are small. But a letter is smaller than a man, and it had changed the city beneath his feet. They assembled in the throne room. Stannis stood before the iron seat, but did not sit. Davos stood to one side. Tyrion stood to the other with his hands in his sleeves. An old habit of monks and criminals and dwarfs. Varys melted in and out like a curtain moving without wind. Catelyn came later with a Tully guard. Her face set in lines it had not had a year ago. Robb arrived 2 days after that, when the gates had been cleared and the river had been secured and 1,000 small fires were being put out in alleys and kitchens. Joffrey and Tommen were in 2 cells, clean and well-fed. Myrcella was sent to the Septines and kept safe, which is to say that men who wanted to hurt her had to go through women who had been burned once already in their lives, and were ready to be burned again, and would hurt with a silence that made men afraid. Cersei was confined to quarters that were too elegant to be called a cell, and too closely watched to be called anything else. She paced and drank wine and looked out over a city that she had thought she owned and saw it looking back at someone else. Stannis spoke. He was not eloquent. It did not matter. He spoke of law. He spoke of the blood that gives right when men agree upon it and the duty that answers when right calls it. He did not speak of love. He did not speak of forgiveness. Ned listened and felt something like gratitude move through him. It was not love and it was not kinship. It was relief. There might be a way forward that did not require him to bury more of himself. Lord Eddard, Stannis said, turning to him and the H. All hushed because the Iron Throne had never addressed such a man with such simple courtesy. You did what had to be done. You did it slowly, and you warned a woman who did not deserve it, and you did not take the city with knives the way my brother's friend would have done. You are not Stannis. That is for the best. Will you take the hand's chain for me? Ned thought of the weight of it, and of the lessons he had learned in the past months, and of all the ways honor can be a cloak and a chain. He did not answer at once. He looked at Catelyn, who had come into the hall as if walking into snow she had not expected this early. He looked at Robb, who stood straight, no trace of the boy left in him. He looked at Sansa and Arya. Sansa's face was pale and set. Arya's eyes had learned to look through things. Yes, he said, for the realm. Stannis nodded once. He turned then to Tyrion. You will serve as my master of coin, he said. Tyrion raised both brows. Is that punishment or reward? Your choice, Stannis said. Very well, Tyrion said. Then reward. He smiled thinly. I have always preferred to count other men's money. There is much to count, Stannis said, and more to cut. He did not speak to Varys. He did not need to. Varys would serve anyone who could keep his little birds fed. Your Grace, Catelyn said then, and her voice never faltered. though one could have forgiven it if it had. What will you do with the queen? Queen, Stannis repeated. Call her that if you like. I will call her by her name because titles are not armor anymore. She will live. He ignored the sound Cersei made, a small bright scrape of fury. She will be sent to Casterly Rock under guard, and kept there to see the sea she has never seen. He paused. Her father will be dealt with differently. He will bring an army, Robb said. He will, Stannis said. He's already in the field, Tyrion pointed out. He has been since before any of us were prepared to call anything by its proper name. If he is a fire, he is a slow one. He burns only what he thinks he can keep. He will be less slow now. Lord Stark, Stannis said, this is your affair as much as mine. Tywin Lannister must be checked. You have chains upon him, his sons. We will use them. Cersei laughed then, sharp and mean, and something of the girl she had been when she still believed that prettiness could by impunity flashed and was gone. You think he will bend, she said, because you have our children. You do not know my father. I do not need him to bend, Stannis said, only to stop pushing. Cersei stared. She had never met a man who did not want to win by having others kneel. She had never met a man who would be satisfied with steadiness. She did not understand it. She filed it away as an insult to be avenged later. Your Grace, Ned said. If I may. You may, Stannis said. I ask for mercy for the children, Ned said. For all of them. I have already given it, Stannis said, almost impatient. Ask for something harder. Ned thought and then did the thing that had made men trust him even when he was wrong. He asked for something that cost him. My son will go north, he said, with his men. We will finish the war in the west as you direct. After that, I ask leave to return to Winterfell. The wall is real, though men in this city forget. We will need to look outward as well as inward. Stannis studied him. You are a man who believes in tales told to frighten children into their beds, he said. I am, Ned said. Very well, Stannis said. I am a man who believes in a god who burns. We will see which of us is more useful afterward. He looked at the hall. Hear me. The law is made again. Swear your oaths. We will write letters. We will send ravens. He almost smiled then, as if the word had become a jest. We will do what we have always done, and finally mean it. Messages went out again. Ravens lifted from the rookery like seed. Some perched where Stannis intended. Some were shot. Some found their wings clipped by mistakes. The realm, which had been set spinning by men with personal reasons and petty hates, began to slow and turn in a different direction. It did not become new in a night. It did not become good. It became tolerable. For a while, Tywin, when he learned, burned and broke and then sat back and counted. He had coins hidden where even his descendants would not find them, and men who had eaten at his table and made oaths they would break when it was profitable to do so. He gathered them and moved them along the Green Fork and across the Mummers Ford and sent them like blades. Robb met them and learned. He won and learned. He lost and learned. He sent Theon Greyjoy east with messages to Pike that did not say what Theon wanted to hear. Theon watched the sea and felt the old pull in his bones and tried to be two men at once. Balon Greyjoy read Lord Stark's letter again and told himself it was insult. Asha laughed in his hall and told him that a kingdom made of rock and wind was already theirs if he would only stop trying to steal turf that would drain under their feet. He did not listen. He sent ships north. Doran Martell sent quiet words over the narrow sea and then sat on his chair and looked out at the water and asked the gods to let him outlive his enemies, which is all any of us ever pray, and then whispered another prayer, more dangerous, that he might outlive his own plans. The Tyrells waited. They fed the city when it needed feeding and pretended not to notice the gratitude that pooled like wine in their favor. Margaery came to court and smiled precisely the right amount at precisely the right men. Olenna sharpened her tongue and then set it aside. She would use it when it mattered. In the meantime, she planted. Stannis ruled. He did not enjoy it. He moved papers. He cut down men who needed cutting. He sometimes listened to his Red Woman and sometimes did not. He made the faith anger. Why and the commons uneasy and the lords sullen? In other words, he governed. He did not dance at feasts, he did not laugh. He took his daughter's hand and led her into the sun sometimes, and he did not show he enjoyed that either, but Davos saw and felt his throat hurt. Ned wore the hand's chain and discovered that a chain can be an anchor when the ship is dragged by storms. He accepted that sometimes justice and mercy do not fit in the same room. He set aside coin for the night's watch and sent men north carrying no banners but duty. He went to the God's Wood and breathed. He brought his daughters to council sometimes because he wanted them to know what it smelled like. He told Sansa she could keep her songs and still see how men lie with smiles. He told Arya that a sword is only as good as the hand that holds it and the mind that stops it. He wrote to Bran and told him that stories told by old women in kitchens might save more men than swords. He wrote to Robb and said, "Hold fast." He wrote to Catelyn and did not write what he wanted to, which is that he had missed her like a limb. Tyrion balanced ledgers and dreamed of fires. He told himself that if one must serve, one may as well serve competence. He took coin from places that had looked empty and left them less so. He made enemies with a smile and friends with jokes and discovered, to his own surprise, that the smallest things pleased him now. A day when no man hanged, a night when the city went to sleep with bread in its belly. Winter kept its own counsel. Beyond the wall, eyes opened that had not been known to close. Jon Snow stood on a high place and looked north and felt something he had never felt. Not fear but recognition. He had received a letter from his father, not from a Crannogman's friend, not from a crow with food in its mouth, but from his father, plain words that both warmed and weighted him. He folded it and tucked it into his shirt and decided to go where duty pointed. It pointed north. Ravens passed overhead, and he looked up. A letter had changed a city. Whether it could change a world, none of them knew. They went on. On a day when the first leaves in the Kingswood showed a hint of a yellow that should not have been there so early, Stannis held court in the Red Keep and judged a thief. He sentenced the man to hard labor and half rations for a fortnight and returned the stolen onions to a woman whose baby had been crying through half the hearing. He listened to Davos's whispered suggestion and said no. He listened to Ned's counsel and said yes. He signed a writ and handed his pen to a scribe. He rubbed his eyes. Then he raised his head because something in the room had changed. Varys stood in the doorway. He did not look as he usually looked. He looked like a man who had reached into a bag he knew the contents of and found something simmering instead. "Your Grace," he said. "Ships from the east." "Merchants?" Tyrion asked, brightening, because there is no better word to a master of coin than ships, unless it is empty ships arriving full. "Not only," Varys said. "Sails I do not know. Sails I hoped never to see until we were ready." Stannis's mouth thinned. "What color?" "Black," Varys said. "And red." He paused, as all men do when they are about to say something that will pull in, like a fisherman's net, far more than fish. "And silver." Ned felt a cold that was not from wind. "Dragons?" he said, and one could have forgiven him if he had meant it only as a story. But in this city, stories found ways to put on flesh. "Not dragons," Varys said, "but a banner that remembers them. My Lord Hand, you taught us that letters can move kings. Let us pray that banners cannot yet do the same." Stannis rose, and he did not reach for a sword, because all the swords in the world would not cut a sail. He put both hands on the arms of his chair and pushed himself to his feet. He looked at Ned and saw there a mirror for only a kind of iron he recognized. "Well," he said, "there is always another storm." He went to the balcony and looked out over the city he had won without joy and would hold without awe, because that is what men like him do. A wind came in off the bay and shook the flags of the Red Keep. Below, the streets pulsed with daily doing. Men sold fish, women mended, children ran. Somewhere a boy practiced with a sword that was only wood, and somewhere a girl learned to wear a look that would keep her from harm. Far out on the water, a line of sails showed itself like a sentence written upon the horizon. The first word was fire. Perhaps the last word would be snow. All the words in between would be written by men who were learning, at last, that truth travels faster than they think, and that sometimes when you tell one another a thing everyone has always known, the world changes because you were brave enough to say it. Eddard Stark stood beside him. He did not smile. He did not sigh. He rested his hands on the stone and felt the warmth of it, and thought, perhaps letters and law are not enough. Perhaps we must learn, too, to forgive. When winter arrives, you do not survive by keeping perfect score. You survive by setting aside. He would not say that to Stannis. Stannis would not hear it, but he would write it to his son. He would write it in a hand careful and plain, and he would seal it with the dire wolf and send it north on wings that had learned, in this new world, to carry more than simple words. The sails in the distance shifted. A gull cried. Tyrion made a small, obscene joke to himself and then composing his face to sobriety, rehearsing coin and cost. Varys folded his hands, thinking of birds that had flown too far. Catelyn tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear and thought of rivers and about when it is right to mend and when it is wrong to dam. Sansa sang without sound. Arya counted, lips moving, men, doors, places to climb. The city waited. The realm remade not by steel alone but by the courage to say a thing aloud, held its breath and stepped forward.